thing that's been exciting to see is kind of the convergence between how things that are important in construction are working their way upstream into design so that, we can eliminate some of the errors and the waste that happen throughout a normal process.
I hope 5 years from now we are talking about a world where data is going from forma in concept all the way to tandem and a built environment where you're using Bluetooth sensors or whatever to tell what traffic flow is really like at this intersection.
AI is actually one of the great equalizers. It doesn't matter the size of the firm. I think everybody should lean into it because there is an opportunity for everybody to understand the influences of AI in your specific business. Let's get right into it. Can you start maybe by telling our Viewpoints listeners a little bit about you, your journey, and your role at Autodesk?
Sure. So I had been with Autodesk for over 21 years. I joined the company through an acquisition on the manufacturing side of the house. But then about 12 years ago, I came over to the AEC side, and I've been working in AEC for the last 12 years. And so it's been really exciting for me to be part of an industry that's going through so much transformation and has so much opportunity to really deliver better outcomes for you and your customers, and really for the planet. So today I'm responsible for all of our architecture, engineering, and construction solutions. And the other thing that's been exciting to see is kind of the convergence between how things that are important in construction are working their way upstream into design so that we can eliminate some of the errors and the waste that happen throughout a normal process.
Thanks, Amy. I know I'm looking forward to it. I know there's a lot there, especially in the construction side. Definitely looking forward to that. So, Ryan, maybe for our Viewpoint listeners, a little bit about your role at VHP and what you're doing to help our clients really leverage some of the design tools and specifically AI.
Sure. So, Amy, thanks for joining us. Ryan Noyce, I've been with VHP for almost 28 years now. I am a recovering designer. Started my time doing highway design and moved into our technology enablement team. And that move, I now lead a team that is focused on how we do digital delivery here at VHP. So teams partnering with clients as well as internal teams on preparing for digital delivery and the digital future, and specifically around AI. My team spends a lot of time focused on how will our current partners, yourselves is one of them, how will we be presented solutions that are focused around using AI tools to make better decisions on our projects? Really looking to remove some of the fear around leveraging AI on projects and get people comfortable with that idea that this can be another assistant to have as we move forward in design. Amy, it was really kind of interesting that you started your journey on the manufacturing side, an industry that has always been a little bit ahead of us as far as moving to models as the deliverable and moving towards generative design. And really curious, how do you see our industry transforming? Are there parallels that you see from your previous career?
Oh, that's a great question. Manufacturing was driven to 3D parametric design out of necessity, a lot earlier than AEC. Part of that was, manufacturing, you're looking for volume. And so everything is not a one-off kind of project. And so it was absolutely required. And it's been really exciting to see how those principles have been applied to, AEC over the last 20 years. And for me, the final, maybe not the final frontier, but one of the exciting frontiers is getting more manufacturing principles deployed on projects. I think our MEP coworkers have been doing offsite fabrication for a very long time. And we need more and more, components in the building to become, or in an infrastructure project, to be, manufactured and assembled offsite and then brought onto the job site, right? It has amazing impacts on cost, schedule, safety, sustainability. So that's really an area where I see a lot of customers experimenting, but not as much, at scale deployment of that yet. So I think that could be a place where AI helps us for sure, but it's definitely something we need the industry to be thinking more about.
Oh, it's definitely coming faster, isn't it, Amy? And I'm sitting there, you talk about AI and the onslaught of it. You're out representing the entire industry across. What are some of the things that really keep them up at night relative to hearing about AI? So there's this difference between hearing about AI and really where it is today versus the journey where it's going to be over the next 5, 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's sort of a cycle that people go through. Especially I think the first question is, oh my gosh, is AI going to take my job? Right? And I think all of us hopefully have realized no, might change your job, but it's not going to take your job. Then I worry, is AI going to take my IP? Will it take my secret sauce? Will I lose my competitive advantage? And then I worry like, oh gosh, my data is kind of messy. And I have data, but my data is not structured, and if I go back 5, 10 years, do I really want to use that data to do the things I'm doing today? And it just kind of goes, on and on and on. And the other question then becomes, well, will my customer be okay with me, using the data on the project to deliver better outcomes? And so there's this like sort of constant journey, but I think what's helping us a lot are all the commercially sort of consumer like use cases, and the use cases we find within our Microsoft applications are really helping people realize it's not as maybe scary or as, and that there's a ways to go, right? It's doing some pretty, summarizing meetings is great, but we have a ways to go before we're getting, deeper into some of the more knowledge-based activities that our people do.
So, Amy, I think it's interesting that you went to kind of that fear and the transparency and what happens to my data conversation. I thought it was really interesting at AU this year that was really a focus for Autodesk. Was that decision really something you got to so that you could drive adoption? Like, we need people to have confidence in this. Was that how you positioned it?
Yeah, so trust is really important to us with our customers, as it is, I think, with all of you and your customers. And so, we knew that one of the important sort of hurdles that people had to get over was really understanding how their data was being used, what the risks were, if there were any, and us being transparent about how, what we were doing with the data. So we've always had, I think, like many of you, we have internal governing bodies that govern both the internal use of AI at Autodesk, as well as, lots of approvals and checks that anything we're doing within the products is, ethical and appropriate. And so we have a lot of those things happening, and now we're trying to expose that more externally with these, they almost look like nutrition labels. So really helping you understand, what is the feature? How is it, how does it use AI? And a lot of AI use cases don't even involve, project data per se. Some of them use synthetic data, surrogate models, inferences, all kinds of things that are just really good for everyone in a very zero risk kind of way.
So Ryan, to that point, I mean, even to VHB, I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges. Good data yields good AI, right? So what is VHB doing to help drive the data standardization of VHB?
Well, it's interesting, Dave. There's a couple things around that. I think when you look at our key initiatives, it's really it aligns well that our data initiative and our AI initiative essentially both started at the same time. It was almost like we realized you can't do one without the other. And you've heard me say before that data is the engine that feeds AI, or the fuel that feeds the AI engine rather. And really with us, it is about standardizing where we find our data and really trying to formalize the process around documenting authoritative data. So leveraging tools that are standards in that industry. ACC, Amy, is a tool that we're using more and more here at VHB around submissions, around tracking of milestones on projects. And I think that is helping, Dave, versus the lack of clarity that we've always had around, oh, well, that file's got a date in it. Does that mean it wasn't good at that date, or that was the date we submitted that file? I don't know, Amy, if you're, hopefully you're finding we're not the only customer that has that problem that we're trying to
No.
address. So,
Well, and you know that on the journey to digitize for most of our customers, having access to the most current information is one of the most important things, right? And I think one of the great use cases of AI is really, search and retrieval. And it does it a lot better than any human could do, a lot faster across multiple systems, and it can help you look for those discrepancies, right, before you go off and make new decisions or you know spend money on things. And so that's I think is one of the ways that also gives people confidence. And one of the cool things about some of that is, like, when you get the information, having that attribution and being able to know, okay, you found it all, but don't just give me, just give me the answer, give me the background so I can go and find it. And I know you guys are passionate about that as part of your AI journey as well.
Yeah, so I'm interested because I've heard Ryan mention this, but also you just brought it up earlier, the new data nutrition levels, right? Maybe if you can talk a little bit about that. I think it's interesting from the perspective of the correlation of that versus the data.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we made up, but it was more like to have a consistent way of describing how we're using AI. I think one of the challenges I think at any software company is there's a lot of different ways to deploy AI, and so you want to be able to repeatedly tell your customers how you're using data. So one example is we have generative design capabilities in the products. So for example, a generative design feature doesn't really train on any customer data. That's all algorithms and a lot of software in the background producing those generative examples that we're coming up with for our customers. So the nutrition label would clearly say, what method is it using? Because there's dozens of different AI methodologies.
Right.
What type of data is it using? Where did the data come from? And it kind of checks things off. And so you can look across our portfolio as we build all these out and see, where are things, how is data being used. On the other hand, we have AI that, helps answer, help questions, right, through Autodesk Assistant. And so that is ingesting like all of the documentation we've made over the years and all of that. So that's a different type of data. And so just being clear on the broad spectrum of data and what we're using where and how.
so Amy, you mentioned the assistant, and we've been lucky enough to be testing some of your newer assistants. Like you recently released the ACC AI assistant, which is connecting to data that we're now storing in the cloud, and it's connecting to our data. Have you found that is where the biggest demand is from your clients around AI right now, your customers? Is it around those kinds of tools?
I think it's a journey right now. A lot of people want automation. So I would say in terms of, automating tedious tasks, whether it's on the design side, the handover side or the construction side, I think anything to do with, counting things, aligning things. One of the problems that we solved in AutoCAD was block alignment, right? You might use 5 different toilets, or the same toilet, but you might use 5 different blocks to represent that toilet, right? So we can go through a drawing and align all of that, right? That's just general productivity goodness that you want to see more and more of that so that your people can focus on the high value tasks. So I think everyone loves the automation and the productivity enhancements. And after that, then they are starting to think about how can I create insights from the data that I have? And that's where the assistant starts to come into play. Like, can I look at, history and predict, maybe RFI if we always have problems on these projects and we have these types of RFIs, can we somehow figure out how to make changes earlier in the project on the next project so we don't have the same problem? So I think you go from automation to kind of search and retrieval to then creating insights. And then for me, what's going to be great in the future is then, taking action. So to tell, to use an agent to tell it to go and make, a change on your behalf. So you don't even have to go in there, and it can go across a project and make a change for you without you having to, have a human do all that work.
So, as you look at the entire suite that you support and bring to a project, whether it's info drainage to do drainage design, whether it's Revit to do structural modeling, whether it's Civil 3D to do the work that we do around site design. What's Autodesk's strategy around using an AI assistant or tool across all those platforms? That's a lot of different data types.
Yeah, so we're building this thing we call the AEC data model. So part of what unlocks a lot of the value here is, getting the data out of the, proprietary file formats that we've all used for decades. So right now we are working to populate what we're calling an AEC data model. We started with Revit data, but by doing that, you've now got a granular data model that you can interrogate without having to like open Revit and use the API. So it's very much connected to Docs. And so we started with Revit, and we'll be, adding more and more types of data to that. And what's interesting there is, this will be an open ecosystem. And so, others can use the data model if they choose, but also you'll be able to take that data and mash it up with your other data, right? All your data in SharePoint or your ERP system or what have you, because it's not just, right, some of the insights of the future will come from combining, the business data with the design data. And I know from talking to all of you in the past, we don't think you should have to haul all this data into one common location to do this kind of work, because you're going to use multiple systems, and that will get expensive and time consuming. So the way we can connect all these things using an AI will be great, but it has to be on a granular, very fast basis and a standardized basis.
Yeah, it's exciting to see the unified approach coming and actually connecting them. And Ryan, you went through several of the different applications that Autodesk has. This may be a completely random question for me, because I'm curious. What has been the best success story that you have seen at Autodesk relative to some of them? So Ryan, you mentioned that and Forma, for example. One of the areas that I'm just extremely intrigued, and this is just me, is your energy optimization, the rapid optimization tool. It's a big push these days in the industry. So where are you starting to see like the biggest push and the biggest momentum and some of the biggest, success stories?
I would say there's a couple things I'm really proud of. So one thing I'm really proud of is we started, 3 or 4 years ago, using the usage insights to give users advice on, and to detect when a user was frustrated and kind of get in there and give them feedback. And we've now made that more nearly real time. So, we know our products are complex. And so the more we can do to help users on their learning journey, and even the, expert users, helping them understand, maybe there's other ways to do things that they weren't aware of. So I'm really proud of that. I'm also really proud of what you talked about with the energy modeling and the carbon and all those things, because we've been able to take something that used to have to go out to a consultant, come back, I don't know, a week, 3, 4 days later, and put it in throughout the portfolio, but also in the very early phase of the project, so that people can see in nearly real time, as they make changes on that conceptual design, the impact that it has on, noise and other sustainable, environmental conditions on the projects. And so that I think is very cool, because we had to have the detailed capability in order to create the surrogate model that we use to do the near real time. So we're really democratizing the ability to do that type of analysis with AI.
Oh, that's exciting. It's exciting. It's when you started talking about the sustainable side of things, and you talk about carbon counting, and this is actually one of the biggest pushes that we're making as VHB. We're looking at how do we actually help make and change the carbon footprint and the carbon impact that we're doing. So it is a great partnership, Ryan, that we have, with Autodesk and trying to push this inside our footprint. So what are we doing at VHB to actually help that as well? Where do you see some of the areas that VHB is going relative to the embedded carbons and the calculators and so forth?
So it really is started with our change in approach to design, where when we made the commitment that we will be building models, we will not be doing traditional plan development, even if the client isn't requiring that model. If we're going to commit to sustainability, we have to commit to having data that we can understand our impact on our world around us. So, we right now are doing a very detailed coaching program, Amy, that I'm sure you're aware of with our staff, teaching them how to maximize, the tools that we have available to us. And part of that is we are bringing in our sustainability leads at VHB to talk about embodied carbon and doing embodied carbon calcs as part of our design process. Dave, so it really is getting people to understand that the data is not just valuable to the client, it's also valuable to us throughout the process of design. So, Amy, I think that it's really interesting to see how we're going to be able to position some of these tools to overlay when we have that AECO data model available to us so that we can get AI to give us that data back. I'm not going to say instantly because there's work that needs to be done to interrogate the model, but much faster than we could do it before.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the great things about AI is it's very amenable to experimentation, right? And I think that's one of the things as I talk to customers that's really important is there's a lot out there. We don't know which ones are going to end up being the very best for, our use cases. And so I think having a sort of a learning mindset around these things and experimenting. And then what I've heard from customers is, they start out, kind of with a bit of a Wild West in some ways. And then they start to determine, well, which of these things actually deliver value to my company? Which of these things deliver value to my customers? And then start to hone in on, where it's worth their, overall investment to advance. And then keeping an eye out on what's just happening across the industry, because this is, in my career, the fastest changing environment that I've ever seen.
Yeah, thank you. Ryan, so relative to VHB, right? Similar question to you. What is VHB doing in some cases to educate and inform internally? Because we have a lot of different applications, a lot of interest in what Autodesk is doing. So how are we educating folks internally at VHB on what Autodesk is doing and getting that message out as well?
So there's a few different things, Dave, that that we do around that. I'd mentioned that we have that advanced training that we do, which definitely my team alone cannot support 2,200 staff members. So I think
you do a good job, though. You do a really good job, my friend.
Thanks, but the reality is, if you really want to drive change, driving that change from within the teams and giving them an understanding of what these tools do and how to leverage them is important. So we do everything from training those advanced users to also we run open sessions talking about new tools and advancements that are coming into the tools. I think the AI office hours here at VHB gets a pretty significant attendance, and we run that a couple times a month, where it'll be focused not only on technology staff bringing tools to the users, but also on users sharing their experiences with each other. I think while everybody always trusts technology, Amy, I don't want you to think that people doubt technology and upgrades and is everything going to work? It always works. But hearing from that end user that this is really something that applies to me and was valuable. We have developed some of our own assistants, Amy, similar to the Autodesk Assistant, that allows us to ask a question to a tool and have it provide a client-focused answer. And validating that and working to tune those. I think that's one of the big things that has really changed people's perspective here, Dave. I don't know what you think on AI, is that the recognition that it's not, well, this is what you get and you can't make it better, but you make it better by using it and testing it and finding where it makes mistakes and training that model. So, I'm not sure, have you seen that same sort of reaction too, Amy, with, oh, the first version of this tool really wasn't great, but the feedback made version 3 much better?
Yes. Well, and quickly, which has been great. So we started with the GitHub Copilot for software developers, and the first release of that was very much not appreciated, but the people that stuck with it and kept going, yes, they're contributing, making it better, and they're actually seeing real impact. And I think that's important, certainly with anything we release, but also with all the other external ones. The rapid development here is really great, and they get better by design. That's kind of how they're they're meant to be, which also means for all of us, you and my team included, who are building these things, like it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing, right? They can also wander off and hallucinate if you're not, if you're not careful about constantly understanding how they're performing. So that is a different mindset that we bring to developing these things.
So it's really kind of interesting that you see that internally too as a software company that, oh, first one, nobody was really that thrilled with it, but as we go on, I always think of engineers being a bit stuck in their way. I don't think of software
Well,
developers.
let's talk about that, because what I hear from most of the customers I talk to is, they do what you've been doing, right? They find the evangelists and they have the meetups or the weekly tips and just trying to encourage people to use it. And the thing I've spoken with them about a little bit too is, what about the aging population at work that has all of that amazing knowledge in their brains, and it's in the projects, but that are maybe a little reluctant to engage sometimes with some of these tools. So I and even at Autodesk, I can tell you, like we it change is hard, and exploring new ways of doing things is hard. So we're very much doing a lot of things to encourage people to at least try these things out in some way. And I'm wondering what you all are doing there.
So we do try, right? And that is a constant challenge with anything in terms of new technologies, right? In terms of the testing, trying. So I would say back in 2019, VHP senior leadership really pushed, trying to actually engage and lean into some of the AI initiatives that were out there, test it in a very safe sandbox, and making sure that it was protected data, that we're not out publicizing anything out there. The interesting thing, Amy, and I have heard that relative to the aging population and where that legacy knowledge is actually going to be lost. Right? When is the day that we're actually going to create an assistant for that person that's basically mirror matching and replicating everything that came out of the individual, and how does that happen? I personally, I believe that we're probably not too far away from creating those type of agents and the personalities, and I can actually see an avatar of myself in about 5-10 years that's going to have the same personality. I apologize to all the listeners that's going to have my personality on it, but it's going to happen, right? Where you're going to start to actually get that information in there and retain some of the knowledge that would have been lost over time, right?
Yeah. Well, if you think about them as coworkers, right? You're kind of the senior person training and onboarding the more junior coworker, and they'll learn pretty quickly, hopefully.
Yeah, and Ryan, as you know, one of the biggest pushes that we started probably about a year and a half, 2 years, which is part that your team's involved in, and a lot of other folks across the footprint of the company, is trying to actually standardize the data that we collect so we can actually make better informed decisions and get insights that you were referring to earlier, Amy. So we've started to actually automate all of our collection process, our field collection, our data collection, to go away from the paper. Hopefully in the next year to 2 years, we won't even be talking about that. We'll be all digital format at that point. That will let us make better informed decisions, better insights on where we make our decisions.
So Dave, I actually would like to hear the answer from both of you on this question. But one, as we standardize our data, and two, as AI becomes more able to assist us with not only just tasks that are built into the software, but with things like fostering a culture of citizen developers, where it's no longer scary anymore to say, hey, how do I do a Python script that does this? Are you seeing that kind of outside the standard tools really become a drive here and a push for VHP to have more people who can understand an API that Autodesk may provide us with, or that Microsoft provides us with?
So Ryan, I'm going to answer the question by going back a couple of years, and we were presented to the executive leadership team, and we asked the question of several of the younger folks, where do you see the design team, Amy, going relative to VHP, right? And they said this was one of the responses. You may have today 10 engineers or designers on this and maybe one software. We're looking and pushing that in probably 5 years or less, you're now looking at upskilling some of the different team members to actually have different skill sets. And you may end up having 5 people, but some of them may be majority of 3 or 4 are on the software side, or at least on the prompting side of it, right? It doesn't relinquish the right or the obligation of an engineer to essentially review and certify the document. So that's still going to have to be and hold true. There's a lot of different questions relative to the full automation and the requirements for insurability, licensure, delivery, and so forth. But I do see a change, Ryan. I see a change in the team composite and how they're actually built out. I look at it as partnering with Autodesk to understand where those workforces are going, and we're going to have to evolve. That also starts, in my opinion, going back to the middle school, high schoolers, and as they come up through the programs in the universities, that has to change, right? Doing what we're doing today is not going to be the same as what we're doing in 5 years from now.
Yeah. So as a software company, our workforce will transform also a little differently. We are obviously hiring more data people, people that can analyze the data, people that, understand how to do AI at scale. But we also, when we do that, as in anything we build, we can't sacrifice, the quality of the product, all the ethical and trust and safety and all the things that we put in the product. So, all those things need to move hand in hand. Where I see interesting potential transformation is sort of the interaction paradigms will change with the products as we get more AI kind of doing things that you are all doing manually. What is the new way that you're going to interact with the product, right? What is the prompt? What are the prompts going to look like? What are the inputs going to be? It's not just going to be, natural language over time. So we need to do more, research and really think about how our user experience teams are designing experiences for the future. Maybe so you can have some of those low code, no code, citizen developer kind of things happening.
So Amy, you opened it up. You opened it up. So 5-10 years from now, you got your crystal ball. What does it look like? What does it look like at that point?
Oh, well, everyone's talking about agents and agentic workflows, and so there'll be more and more of those. I think to whichever one of you made the point about, okay, safety is important. We're not making a 2D image. We're making a 3D thing that has to be sound and performant and all that other kind of stuff. So I don't ever think. I think we'll get further, but we won't. We will still always have humans in the loop, kind of making sure that we're doing all of those things. One thing I've been thinking about in regards to this question is I think that the notion of operating system and platform will become kind of a moot point. I think all the desktop products will be lighter. We'll have web, mobile, all the different kinds of applications, but I don't think it will matter so much as to where things are necessarily running. I think we'll be in a situation where you do the workload wherever it makes the most sense for your people. If they're on a job site with an extremely powerful mobile device, things can happen there. If you're in the office, if there's certain things that are, well suited for the web. I do believe, all the data we're talking about will be normalized and standardized in the cloud in some way that helps us, drive all these workflows. But I think the notion of, desktop or cloud or any of that will kind of blur in a way that is great for everyone.
So with that, Amy, do you, please tell me you do, but do you see a future where, okay, the seam between that design model and the data used in construction, one thing that always scares me is that, you see the stats of 90+% of our data that we use in design just vanishes when it goes to construction. Do you see that day where, okay, we're just going to bring you into the project now, contractor, take that data and go with it? Is that something that you see in the 5-year future? Or?
It's something I hope for in the industry, and in addition to that, right, it's really about building up trust and aligning on the deliverables, right? So that because I was in this discussion just this week, is the architect's model, should it be the constructible, design? Should that design be the construction version? And if we can use AI to kind of create different representations of the data so that it's, purpose built for the different use cases, and then bring that all the way out to, a digital handover, at the end of the project, right? Then we've got the digital data being the data of record, as opposed to, drawings and things that might get outdated. So yes, I think AI will help us increase trust. I think it will help us create the different representations of the data that we need for the different use cases. And then I think it will help us create that closed loop of feedback, from the very end to the beginning, where we say, oh yeah, don't do that anymore, right? Like, let's talk about, water penetration issues, right? If we could track those, through all the decisions made in a project, and then, gradually diminish, because nobody likes to work on any of that stuff. And it would be great to, make that a non-problem in the future.
So,
Yeah.
Ryan, to you, I'm coming to you now,
Uh-oh.
because I want to hear, and now that I got this recorded on the viewpoints, where do you see VHB's design services aligning and going in the future? Same question that Amy had to answer. Fair back to you. So, where do you see the VHB positioning to go, 5, 10 years down the road?
Honestly, 5 years down the road, I think the first change that we see with our design teams is a change into a data steward model, I'm going to call it. Really, especially for us, Amy, in the architectural space, that's been there for a while. Like, you have had to have someone who is really kind of curating that data throughout project development. And I think that that's a big change that our teams need to get over the hump and into this model of, okay, I need to have curated data so that we can effectively leverage it for everything from stormwater analysis, to traffic flow, to constructability concerns. When we start talking about clash detection and other pieces, like, that doesn't happen with each of our different parts of a project team working separately. So I think that the first thing we're going to see is a new focus on who is our data coordinator on this project. Because that data coordinator is going to facilitate what tools can be available on a project. I hope 5 years from now we are talking about a world where data is going from Forma in concept all the way to Tandem and a built environment where you're using Bluetooth sensors or whatever to tell what traffic flow is really like at this intersection. But I think you don't do that unless you really have someone who is managing the data, and the expectation of that data downstream is the biggest change I think we're going to see on our design teams.
So let me ask a question, because some of that will probably require working differently with your customers. And I wonder, what are you doing today to help your customers be more comfortable with AI? Or are they already super comfortable with AI?
Dave, you want to start answering this one?
So the answer to that is there's a range of clients, right? Some are still on their very infant journey on where they are. So the initial reaction is ones that are in that stage don't overreact to the AI terminology. There's a lot of folks like Autodesk that are actually out there doing a lot of research and understanding how the business is going to change. So a lot of our state agency partners are really wait and see in some cases. And then you have some progressive states out there that are basically saying, we're going to go all in. Texas DOT literally a week and a half ago, basically published one of their AI master plans in terms of the direction that they're going, right? So it's interesting to see the range. One of the things that we're saying, and I think it's a common theme under here today, is cautioning any client, whether it's public sector, private sector, to just jump into AI, but more so taking a data readiness to it first, right? You got to have the appropriate data governances in place. You have to have the understanding where it is. Elsewise, you'd be wasting time and effort and a lot of manpower to actually go into the AI portion of it. There are some really progressive clients out there that we work with that are looking at AI and testing it. Some folks down in Florida, some of the agencies down in Florida are testing AI relative to clash detection systems and so forth. How are we helping them, Ryan? We're trying to actually get ahead of some of the advanced technologies out there, the emerging technologies, understand it, and actually marginalize their risk by testing the future of where AI is going, right? Because it is evolving so fast. The biggest message is just don't go too fast without understanding where you run into.
Yeah, and I think, Dave, around that, things like wrong way driving tools and other tools that are very practical and really help improve safety and allow for better emergency response are areas where I think I've heard more successes with our clients. And I think, avoiding the absolutes.
Yeah, one of the things I worry about is at some point, if you're not leveraging AI, you will be falling behind. Whether you're a DOT, a company like Autodesk, a company like VHB, your competitors, your customers, people are going to expect more from you. And if you're not like on that bandwagon and haven't figured out how to make it work for your business, you're not going to be as relevant in the future.
You had
Yeah,
mentioned that the older generation, Amy, if you go to the other side of that coin, there's not going to be a graduate that's starting college today that doesn't come out of school with an understanding of how to leverage AI to help them either write their term paper or figure out an approach to solving a problem. And if we made the blanket statement of thou shalt not use AI at VHB, it would be incredibly short-sighted and challenging to recruit the next
Yes.
generation.
Yes.
And Amy, Ryan, I know we're pushing up on the hour here, and I appreciate it. I have, and I agree with you both. I think AI is actually one of the great equalizers. It doesn't matter the size of the firm. I think everybody should lean into it because there is an opportunity for everybody to understand the influences of AI in your specific business. So I want to leave with one question, right? We have a lot of listeners on this traditionally, and let's leave our listeners with one action item they can take right now to be in place within a year. What would you suggest?
What would I suggest? Well, I would suggest that if they're not doing something with AI, that they pick one. They do a very lightweight scan. Try to pick one thing that they think will have an impact on their business. Make sure it's safe to try from a ethical, trust, data perspective, and get their people, especially their senior people, to try it and to do what you guys have done. Lead kind of by example, and then build that environment within their companies so that people can do safe experimentation.
I appreciate that, the security and the safety of leaning in and trying it. Ryan, how about you?
So I think that there's some real opportunity, Dave, to step back if you haven't got into AI yet and look at what are the things that cause the most pain for you during project development, and look for that opportunity to either reduce risk, and not talking about reducing the risk of using AI, but reducing risk on a project. Like, okay, is there an opportunity here for us to evaluate frequency of change orders, frequency of RFIs that come in, and where does that put this project at risk? But look for that opportunity to leverage AI to provide insight or streamline a process that you do on every job. That I look at clash detection, Amy, to go to a ridiculously simple one.
Yep.
Why are people doing this still with a plan and a pen? That is something that we should be automating using AI to help with that.
And I'm going to take the softball and take the combination of the two, years response, and basically say, I agree, we need to identify one area. If you're listening, identify one area that you're really going to try and lean into and understand. Ryan, taking your pinch points, your friction, your area, and take that one point and identify what it is, and then evaluate if there's an off-the-shelf solution out there that actually can marginalize your risk, because there are a lot of them out there that you could test in a very safe environment. And I would encourage folks to listen and actually do a lot of research on exactly what Autodesk is doing and other vendors. Autodesk has a lot of information out there, YouTube and other areas to actually go and understand what is actually happening in the market. Knowledge is power, and you cannot take that away.